Hey guys, tonight we begin with the life of a man who had it all. Charm, talent, and absolutely no money. The medieval bard, a wandering musician who could rhyme love with dove and still starve to death doing it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. You're born in a one-room hut that smells like boiled cabbage, goat, and generational regret. The year doesn't matter. It's medieval Europe, which means you'll be lucky to survive long enough to develop opinions. Your parents are peasants, which is medieval for background characters, and your only inheritance is chronic back pain and a strong tolerance for disappointment. You, however, are special. You can memorize words. You hum melodies while working. You occasionally rhyme. This is enough for your mother to suspect witchcraft, your father to suspect laziness, and your local priest to start sharpening his exorcism tools. Still, you notice something remarkable. When you sing, people stop working. Granted, they glare at you afterward because they lost count of their turnip rows, but for a brief moment, you had their attention. In an age where entertainment mostly involves plague and gossip, that's practically fame. Then one summer, a group of travelling performers stumbles into your mud-soaked village. They wear colours so bright it feels illegal. They smell faintly of ale and freedom, two things your family hasn't experienced since birth. They tell stories of kings, heroes, and beautiful women who definitely don't exist. Everyone laughs, claps, and forgets they live in a feudal nightmare for a whole 10 minutes. You decide right then, that's the life for you. You'll become a bard. You'll sing your way out of poverty, maybe even own shoes one day. Your parents naturally disapprove. Your father wanted you to inherit the family plough, which has been in the family for 3 generations and killed 2 of them. Your mother suggests joining the monastery, where at least starvation is holy. But you're not meant for that. You want art, adventure, and maybe food. You start small, writing songs about cows that won't milk, and that one guy who fell in the village well. The locals laugh. Someone throws a turnip at you. Success. Then one day, a passing bard hears you and takes you on as his apprentice. You think you've made it, you haven't. You've just signed up for a lifetime of walking, hunger, and applause that never quite pays the rent. But don't worry, you'll die memorable. Probably. Your new master calls himself a renowned bard, which is medieval for unemployed with confidence. He takes you on as his apprentice, meaning you get to carry his lute, polish his boots, and occasionally hum harmonies he'll later take credit for. In return, you receive food, theoretically. The apprenticeship begins with an important lesson. Never perform before the crowd's drunk enough to lower expectations. Your master demonstrates this by waiting until the 3rd round of ale before singing a ballad about a duke who fell off his horse and somehow landed on eternal glory. The crowd cheers. You clap too, partially to stay awake, partially to make sure he doesn't throw something at you. You travel from village to village, living off stale bread, soup that tastes like regret, and the occasional act of pity. The roads are long, the inns smell like mouldy dreams, and your master snores like a catapult in slow motion. When it rains, which is always, your job is to protect the lute, not yourself. Instruments are expensive. Apprentices are not. Each night you perform the same routine, lug the gear, tune the strings, and pretend to enjoy songs you've heard more times than you've eaten this week. If you sing backup too loudly, you get smacked. If you forget a lyric, you get lectured. If you do everything perfectly, you still get told you're not ready. Medieval mentorship is motivational like that. On good nights, you earn coins. On bad nights, you earn experience, which buys nothing. Once, a drunken farmer pays you with a chicken. It escapes before morning. Your master says it's symbolic. You suspect it's karma. Still, you learn. You pick up rhymes, rhythms, and how to fake admiration for rich idiots who think they're poets. You also learn the golden rule of performance. Audiences remember confidence, not accuracy. Sing loud enough, and half the room will assume you're good. After 2 years, your master announces you're ready to go solo. You imagine this means you're finally respected. It actually means he's bored of feeding you. He gives you half a songbook, a broken lute string, and a pat on the back that feels like dismissal. You're alone, underpaid, and underqualified. Congratulations. You're officially a bard now. You've spent months rehearsing in barns, alleys, and occasionally graveyards because the acoustics are better and the dead don't heckle. Now, at last, you're ready to perform on your own. Your venue? A tavern that smells like smoke, sweat, and the ghosts of spilled ale. Your audience? Drunk peasants who think rhythm is a type of disease. You step onto a rickety table that's technically your stage. It creaks under your weight like it's considering early retirement. The crowd is loud, red-faced, and dangerously armed with mugs. You clear your throat. Someone yells, "Don't ruin the mood," which is optimistic because there isn't one. You begin your song, a cheerful little ballad about a knight who wins a tournament and a maiden who immediately regrets meeting him. You've spent weeks memorizing it, crafting the verses, and imagining the applause. 2 lines in, someone burps in perfect time with your chorus. By the 3rd verse, a man in the corner starts shouting requests for a song you don't know, something about goats. Still, you press on, because quitting mid-performance is unprofessional and possibly fatal. You smile through heckling, dodge a thrown crust of bread, and try not to inhale too deeply, because the tavern's air is 70% smoke and 30% regret. Halfway through, a fight breaks out between 2 patrons arguing over whether you're brilliant or awful. You take this as your first compliment. The innkeeper shouts for order. The lute goes out of tune. Someone sneezes directly into your melody. It's going beautifully. Finally, you strum the last chord and bow. The applause is polite. A man tosses you a single coin, which misses and hits the floor. You thank him anyway. Then someone shouts, "Sing something better?" You tell them that was your best one. They don't laugh. By the end of the night, you've earned 3 copper coins, a headache, and the deep realization that music might not be your true calling. Unfortunately, it's the only one you've got. You sleep behind the tavern in a pile of hay that smells suspiciously like goat. It's itchy, cold, and depressing. But it's the first night you've ever slept knowing you survived your own show. And that, technically, makes it a success. You wanted freedom. You got trench foot. Life on the road sounds poetic when you're standing still. But once you start walking, it's just pain with scenery. Every journey is a blur of rain, mud, and livestock with better living conditions than you. Your loot is heavier than your ambition. Your shoes are one good puddle away from extinction, and every innkeeper you meet charges rent like he owns the concept of shelter. You travel mostly by foot because horses are for people who actually matter. When it rains, which it always does, your instrument warps, your clothes rot, and you discover that music sounds terrible when accompanied by the sound of your own teeth chattering. Sometimes you share a campfire with bandits, pretending you're all just travelling performers. They laugh at your jokes. You laugh back. Everyone wonders who's going to rob whom first. The road teaches you things, mostly new definitions of cold and hungry. You learn to play softer when wolves are near and louder when peasants are drunk enough to throw coins. You also learn that sleeping under a wagon is marginally safer than in it, because wagons attract drunks, and drunks attract vomit. You start losing track of seasons. Summer feels like a wet towel, winter feels like punishment, and spring is just allergy season with swords. But you keep walking, because you've convinced yourself that the next town will be better. It won't. The next town smells the same, looks the same, and probably has the same guy throwing things at musicians. Sometimes people are kind. A widow gives you soup. A shepherd offers bread. A child asks you to sing something happy, which is awkward because you don't know any. Happiness doesn't rhyme well with starvation. Still, there's a strange pride in surviving it. The open road becomes your home, the rain your applause, and every tavern your potential stage. You stop dreaming of fame and start dreaming of dry socks. At night, you lie awake, staring at a sky full of stars and the faint illusion of purpose. You tell yourself you're part of a grand tradition of storytellers, not just another peasant with a glorified stick. Then it starts raining again, and you realize you chose this life on purpose. And that's the truly depressing part. You finally make it to a noble's castle, the dream destination of every bard who's ever been tired of sleeping next to livestock. From a distance, it looks majestic. Towers, banners, torchlight. Up close, it smells like wet dogs and political tension. You approach the gate and introduce yourself as a humble musician. The guards laugh. One pats you down, finds nothing worth stealing, and waves you through out of pity. Inside, servants rush, nobles gossip, and you try to look important while clutching your lute like it's an emotional support instrument. The lord of the manor greets you, a round man with the self-esteem of a demigod. You bow so low your back cracks, and he gestures for you to perform. No pressure. If he likes you, you might get a bed and some bread. If he doesn't, you'll get tossed out faster than last week's jester. You start your song, a gentle ballad about his glorious lineage, which you made up entirely. You rhyme valour with splendour, justice with lustrous, and hope he's too drunk to notice. He beams, his guests clap politely, and you exhale for the first time in 3 verses. Success. Then someone requests another song, this time about his military victory. You don't know the details, but you know how these stories go. He won, even if he technically didn't. You sing of his bravery, sharp sword, and noble charge. You make him sound like a legend. The truth is, he probably tripped over a horse and got lucky, but that's your job, to turn mediocrity into myth. Every noble wants to hear how brave they were, how pure their wives are, and how much the peasants adore them. It's like working for medieval propaganda with a better wardrobe. Afterward, he rewards you generously, by medieval standards, meaning a loaf of bread and permission to sleep indoors. His wife compliments your voice. His daughter asks if you know any love songs. His guards look like they want to kill you for both. You leave the next morning, pockets light but ego inflated. You survived the court of flattery. You told lies. They paid you, and nobody executed you for blasphemy. That's not just a victory. That's a career highlight. You learn quickly that truth doesn't pay bills, but flattery might buy dinner. Nobles don't want facts. They want echo chambers with rhythm, so you study the delicate art of lying beautifully. Your training ground? Feasts. Picture 40 sweaty men in armour, a table covered in roasted animals, and you, standing in the corner, trying to rhyme heroic with halitosis. You sing, they chew loudly, and halfway through your verse, someone burps in F sharp. Nobody notices. The goal isn't perfection, it's survival. Every patron is a fragile ecosystem of vanity. One lord wants to be compared to a lion, another to a falcon, another to a mighty river. You try to keep track, but occasionally mix them up. The lion lord doesn't appreciate being called swift and bird-like, and the falcon lord doesn't love being described as large, hairy, and prone to roaring. You escape with your lute intact, barely. You learn to study faces like a gambler studies cards. Compliment the right noble at the right time, and you might get a coin. Compliment his wife too enthusiastically, and you might get thrown out a window. It's a delicate balance between art and unemployment. Eventually, you start recycling lines. Every king is wise beyond measure, every lady is the moon incarnate, and every knight is God's personal headache. Nobody catches on nobles don't talk to each other much, and those who do are too busy being flattered themselves to care. Your songs grow grander, your lies bolder. Once you perform for a duke who recently lost a battle. You turn it into a strategic withdrawal blessed by divine providence. He laughs, his soldiers cheer, and you get a free meal. That's when you realise bards are less artists and more damage control consultants. But flattery has a dark side. The moment your song ends, so does their memory of you. They clap, nod, and forget your name before dessert. You're a ghost with good diction, a professional sycophant keeping fragile egos inflated one verse at a time. And yet, you keep doing it, because every compliment, no matter how ridiculous, buys you one more night off the muddy road. That, in bardic terms, is called success. You thought the road was dangerous. Turns out, other bards are worse. The first time you meet a rival bard, you assume you'll be friends, fellow artists, bonded by music and mutual poverty. Then he smiles at you the way wolves smile at sheep. Within minutes, he's accidentally playing one of your songs, louder and faster, and the crowd loves it. You realise too late that bards don't share. They steal, gossip, and compete like medieval pop stars without the royalties. There's an unspoken hierarchy in your world. At the bottom are the tavern drunks who can't tune their instruments. In the middle are people like you, semi-tolerated, semi-fed. At the top are the court favourites, smug, perfumed parasites who flatter their patrons with lyrics so sweet they'd rot your teeth. You all hate each other equally. Bardic rivalries are vicious. One will spread rumours that you plagiarised a hymn. Another will rewrite your song and perform it better. Some will just trip you on stage and call it choreography. You start carrying a knife, not for bandits, for the competition. Once, in a crowded market square, you find yourself in an impromptu verse duel. You trade insults in rhyme while peasants cheer and throw coins. It starts funny. You call him a tuneless toad. He calls you a donkey in a doublet. But then he rhymes bard with coward, and suddenly you're the one looking foolish. The audience laughs, the kind of laughter that stings. You finish the duel, force a smile, and vow revenge. Bards don't kill each other outright. They ruin reputations instead. You start spreading your own stories, that he can't sing sober, that he was once caught serenading a goat, that his masterpiece was written by a monk. It's not true, but it's believable, and that's all that matters. In the end, no one remembers who started it. You just know your songs are getting sharper, your humour darker, and your performances meaner. You stop writing about love and start writing about triumph, your own, mostly imaginary. Because in this business, survival isn't about talent or truth. It's about volume, confidence, and the ability to insult another musician in perfect meter. Welcome to the bardic battlefield. No swords, no shields, just rhymes and pettiness. And you're finally learning how to win. After too many bruised egos and one particularly bad rhyme duel, you decide to return to the people, the honest, hard-working peasants who appreciate real music. At least, that's what you tell yourself. In truth, no noble wants to feed you, and taverns are the only places left that don't require background checks or deodorant. You arrive in a muddy village square where the smell alone could write its own ballad. Chickens wander freely. A dog sleeps next to a cartwheel. A crowd gathers slowly, farmers, wives, children, and one man who may or may not be dead, but still has a better posture than you. You begin your performance. You sing about harvests, lost love, and kings they'll never meet. They don't care about kings, but they like the bit about beer. You exaggerate your gestures, throw in a wink, and end with a dramatic flourish that earns you. Silence. Then an old woman claps. Once, someone else follows. Then a child shouts, "Sing the one about the farting monk." Ah, yes, the classics. You oblige because you're an artist, but also because you'd like to eat. Laughter erupts. Coins start falling, small, dirty, and beautiful. You bow. For a moment you feel like a legend. Then a man throws a cabbage. You're not sure if it's an insult or dinner, but you take it either way. Performing for peasants has its perks. They're honest, they pay in food, and they rarely execute you for bad metaphors. But they're also unpredictable. One night they cheer, the next they boo because you made fun of the miller's wife, who happens to own the only working oven in town. You learn to read the crowd fast, which is easy because most of them can't read at all between songs. You swap gossip for bread, tell jokes for ale, and charm your way into barns for the night. It's not glamorous, but it's real. These people don't pretend. They don't care about titles or lineage. They just want to laugh before life crushes them again at sunrise. You realize something strange. For all the mud, smell, and poverty, this is the first time your songs actually matter, and it only took total career failure to get here. You'd think the church would love music. Angels have harps after all. But you're not an angel, and your songs don't praise God nearly enough for their taste. The church has a complicated relationship with joy. If it makes people smile, it's suspicious. If it makes them dance, it's sinful. If it makes them forget about their taxes, it's heresy. Your trouble begins when you perform a harmless love song in front of a local priest. It's about a knight and a maiden. Tasteful, wholesome, barely one innuendo. He glares at you like you've just kissed the Virgin Mary. Afterward, he declares your performance morally corrupt and bans you from performing within 5 miles of the chapel. That's half the village. You're flattered your art has reach. Soon, you learn to censor yourself. The trick is to make every song sound holy, while keeping the meaning as filthy as possible. You start slipping double entendres into psalms, songs that make peasants giggle and priests squint. When questioned, you claim it's symbolic. They hate that word. Still, you can't avoid the church entirely. Monks run the inns, priests bless the fairs, and bishops own half the land you sing on. You play for them when you must. Solemn hymns about repentance, sorrow, and how everyone's going to hell except the guy paying you. They nod approvingly, unaware that you've stolen half your melody from a tavern drinking song. Once, a friar invites you to a monastery for a spiritual retreat. Translation: free labour. You spend 3 weeks copying hymns, scrubbing floors, and pretending to find inner peace. The monks are quiet, polite, and utterly humourless. When you crack a joke, they blink slowly, as if laughter were a sin they hadn't memorised yet. But religion pays well, in soup and eternal guilt. You survive by keeping your songs vague. Love could mean divine devotion. Wine could symbolise holy joy. That girl in the red dress is obviously the Virgin Mary, if anyone asks. Eventually, you're invited to leave the monastery, kindly, firmly, and before anyone notices their missing wine jug. You thank them, bow, and wander off. You've learned something important. The church forgives all sins except originality, and that's one you commit daily. Winter arrives like an unwanted encore, long, cold, and impossible to avoid. The roads freeze, the inns fill up, and your lute strings snap faster than your optimism. You're stuck in a nowhere village with a handful of peasants who think entertainment means watching soup boil. You'd leave, but snowdrifts now count as natural fortifications. Your first challenge is survival. You trade songs for shelter, though shelter usually means sharing a barn with animals who have a better diet than you. You play lullabies to cows and call it a concert. They're your kindest audience yet, quiet, warm, and mercifully unarmed. Food becomes your second religion. You'd praise any god who sends bread. You perform at weddings, funerals, and whatever passes for festivals in winter, mostly drinking. Peasants pay you in leftovers, which you accept gratefully and immediately regret eating. You once performed for a family of 7 just to earn half a bowl of turnip stew and a place by the fire. They fall asleep halfway through your second verse, which, honestly, is your best review all season. Evenings are the worst. The cold creeps into your bones like unpaid rent. You tell yourself stories to stay awake. Tales of grand courts, roaring laughter, and feasts that don't end with someone sneezing into the gravy. You remember every tavern, every face, every time someone said, "You'll be famous one day." Maybe they were right. Maybe you'll freeze into a perfectly preserved example of the dangers of artistic ambition. Sometimes the locals beg for songs about spring. You oblige, though your voice cracks and your fingers ache too much to strum properly. They listen, eyes wide, imagining green fields and sunlight while the wind howls outside. For a few minutes, you almost believe your own lyrics. Then someone coughs, the fire sputters, and the illusion melts. You start to wonder if you'll make it to spring. But then you think about quitting and realise there's nothing else you can do. You can't plough, fight, or pray for a living. All you have is music, so you keep singing, not because it helps, but because it's the only sound that reminds you you're still alive. Spring finally comes, and with it, nobles rediscover their favourite hobby, wasting everyone's time. You're summoned to perform for a duke, a man so wealthy his tableware is made of silver and his morals are made of fog. His messenger describes him as a great patron of the arts, which, in your experience, means he doesn't pay on time. You arrive at his hall after 3 days of travel and 2 emotional breakdowns. The place is enormous. Marble floors, banners, servants who look better fed than you've ever been. The Duke greets you with a smile that could curdle milk and says, "Sing something uplifting." You smile back, mentally revising every depressing song you've ever written. Your performance begins. You sing of honour, bravery, and destiny, the usual lies. The Duke nods, his wife yawns, and his mistress flirts with the wine goblet. You hit every note perfectly, but it doesn't matter. Nobles don't listen to music. They wait for it to end politely. Then comes the worst phrase in the medieval language. Do you know any funny ones? You do, but your best jokes involve clergy, goats, and at least one public execution. You try something mild instead. The crowd chuckles. The Duke doesn't. He stares at you like you just insulted his ancestors, which statistically you probably did afterward. He compliments your spirited effort and rewards you with a coin that's been dropped so many times it no longer has a face. His wife insists you write her a love song, and his mistress offers you wine for inspiration. His guards offer you directions to the exit. You spend the night in the servants' quarters, composing lyrics you'll never perform. O noble lord, so round of waist, whose sense of humour hath no taste. You hum it softly until the chambermaid starts laughing and nearly loses her job. At dawn, you're politely asked to leave the estate. The Duke's reason: we prefer music that offends fewer people, which, given your track record, leaves about 3 songs total. You walk away with an empty stomach, a bruised ego, and a new understanding of nobility, rich, powerful, and terminally allergic to entertainment. But at least the wine was good. Summer arrives, and with it comes the only thing more dangerous than winter starvation: public festivals. You hear rumours of a midsummer fair in a bustling town, music, food, and most importantly, paying audiences. You imagine glory, cheering crowds, generous nobles, maybe even clean water. You should know better by now. The fair is chaos. Jugglers, fire-breathers, drunks, livestock, and pickpockets all competing for attention. The air smells like sweat, roasted meat, and mild panic. You find the stage, which is technically a wooden cart that's one sneeze away from collapsing. Still, you tune your lute, straighten your ragged doublet, and tell yourself, this is your big break. The crowd gathers: farmers, merchants, soldiers, children, and at least one guy who looks like he's been lost since last year's fair. You begin with a heroic ballad, voice strong, fingers steady. It goes well for about 30 seconds. Then a drunk noble in the front yells, "Sing something funny." You try humour. He laughs once, then demands a love song his wife doesn't. By your 3rd tune, someone throws a mug. You're not sure if it's praise or criticism, but it still hits your shoulder. A nearby goat starts eating your cloak. You play through the pain, because that's what professionals do. A gust of wind flips your music sheet into a puddle, which you decide is a sign from God to improvise. You start a lively dance tune. The peasants cheer, someone spills ale on your lute, and a fight breaks out near the food stall. Half your audience leaves to watch that instead. Apparently violence has better rhythm. You finish your set to the applause of 3 children, a sleeping beggar, and the goat. When you finally collect your payment, it's a handful of copper, 1 radish, and a promise of exposure. You'd expose yourself to less humiliation begging in the street. Still, you smile, bow, and limp off the stage. That night, You sit by the campfire, counting coins that don't add up to a meal. Around you, the fair continues. Music, laughter, chaos. And for a moment, you feel oddly proud. You survived the worst audience imaginable. Congratulations. You've officially become a real performer. And also, possibly, dinner for that goat. After the festival, you give up on fame and start chasing something far more achievable. A warm bed and an audience that doesn't throw objects. You travel farther than ever before. New towns, new accents, same disappointment. Every place promises opportunity, and every opportunity turns out to be another tavern full of men arguing over who invented beer. Your songs change as you go. Once you sang about noble knights and divine love. Now you sing about hangovers, bad roads, and how every innkeeper is secretly the same man in a different hat. The peasants love it. You've become a poet of low expectations. The wandering life has its routines. Mornings are spent begging for gigs. Afternoons are for walking until your shoes dissolve. Nights are for playing, drinking, and trying not to get robbed. Usually by the same people who applauded you earlier. You start measuring success by how many meals you don't have to steal. You meet other wanderers along the way. Jugglers, jesters, snake oil preachers, and one woman who swears she can talk to chickens. You all share stories by the fire, pretending you're living free, when in truth you're all just professionally homeless. Still, there's comfort in the company misery, as it turns out, harmonizes beautifully. Some nights, you're lucky enough to find a good crowd. You tell jokes, they laugh. You sing sad songs, they cry. You even make a few coins. Then the local bailiff shows up demanding taxes. You explain you own nothing. He taxes your loot instead. You consider crying, but he'd probably charge you for the performance. With time, you stop caring about reputation. You sing for whoever will listen. Lords, peasants, thieves, children. The words come easier now, stripped of flattery, full of truth. You're no longer chasing approval. You're chasing moments. The ones where the audience goes quiet, where the world feels still, and you remember why you ever started doing this. You'll never be rich, and you'll never be remembered. But in taverns across the land, strangers hum your tunes without knowing your name. That's something, isn't it? Then again, so is scurvy. Still, you keep walking, because the next village might be worse, but at least it'll be new. It happens slowly, like a badly tuned string giving way. One day, you wake up and your fingers ache before you even touch the lute. Your voice cracks when you try to sing in the cold morning air. The world feels heavier, the road longer, the applause shorter. Somewhere along the line, your songs stopped being about dreams. They became about survival. You tell yourself you're just tired. Everyone gets tired, but you know better. You've seen what happens to old bards. They don't retire. They just fade out of the taverns, replaced by younger voices with fewer blisters and more teeth. You start wondering if people still hum your songs, or if they've already been stolen, rewritten, and improved. Probably the latter. You still perform, of course. You always perform. But now the taverns are smaller, the crowds thinner, and the tips more symbolic than monetary. Once, you could fill a hall with laughter. Now you're lucky if anyone looks up from their ale. You begin recycling old verses because, frankly, no one remembers them the first time. One evening, during a winter feast, your voice gives out mid-chorus. You cough, laugh it off, and keep strumming, but the sound feels foreign, like your own song doesn't recognize you anymore. The crowd keeps drinking, oblivious. You finish out of habit, bow out of pride, and leave out of necessity. That night, you sit alone by a dying fire, lute in your lap, breath visible in the freezing air. You try to remember your first performance, that terrified boy on a tavern table, singing off-key to a crowd that threw chicken bones. You envy him. He was naive, but at least he thought this life led somewhere. Now, you know the truth. It doesn't. But it doesn't need to. You sang. You made strangers forget their misery for a few minutes. You turned hunger into humour, loneliness into rhythm. You existed loudly, and that's more than most peasants ever manage. You pluck one last note. It's flat, imperfect, human. You laugh, a rasping, ridiculous sound, and let it echo into the dark. When morning comes, the road will keep going, but you won't. And somewhere, someone will still be humming your tune. You're gone before anyone notices, which feels fitting. Bards don't die with fanfare. They just stop showing up. Someone else takes your place at the tavern, probably younger, louder, and significantly worse, but no one says it out loud. Life goes on. The ale keeps flowing, the songs keep playing. Weeks later, a traveller hums one of your tunes while crossing a river. He doesn't know who wrote it, nobody does, but it stays in his head. He sings it to a farmer, who sings it to his daughter, who hums it to her child while spinning wool. The melody twists, softens, survives. Centuries will pass before anyone writes your name down, and when they do, they'll spell it wrong. A monk will copy one of your verses into a book, claiming it came from Anonymous. He'll get all the credit, he'll also ruin the rhythm. Still, your words will live, half forgotten, woven into ballads sung by people who'll never know your story. That's your true legacy, not fame, not fortune, but endurance. You were a ripple in a muddy pond that somehow reached the ocean. The nobility you flattered are dust. The dukes who underpaid you are names on gravestones no one reads. The priests who called your songs sinful now have entire choirs dedicated to repeating the same melodies you once performed for bread. The peasants you sang for, they were your real audience. The laughter, the silence, the brief moments of joy carved out of endless labour that was your cathedral. And your sermons, ridiculous, heartfelt, human. Your lute will rot, your bones will turn to soil, but somewhere a stranger will still sing about a knight, or a fool, or a tavern, or the rain. And the rhythm will feel familiar. That's you, echoing quietly through time. A life spent starving, freezing, and rhyming against the void, yet somehow leaving a mark deeper than most kings ever did. So yes, it sucked to be a medieval bard. You were poor, ignored, and constantly damp. But when the world forgot your face, it remembered your voice. And for someone who lived on applause and lies, that's not a bad afterlife. Before the clash of armies and the thunder of Roman legions, there was Carthage, a city that rose from the Phoenician seas and burned with the light of its own gods. Here, women were not merely shadows behind their husbands, but pillars of Punic life. They carried the rhythm of the city in their daily movements, as essential to Carthage as the scent of incense rising from the temple of Tanit. From birth, a Carthaginian girl was taught the art of balance, between piety and pride, obedience and command. Her mother might have been a merchant's wife managing an entire estate in her husband's absence, or a priestess guiding ceremonies before the goddess. Unlike in Greece, where women's voices were confined to the household, in Carthage, women could own land, sign contracts, and oversee slaves and trade. They were the quiet architects of Punic wealth, practical, disciplined, and fiercely loyal to the city's gods. Every dawn, they would light the household altar to Tanit, the mother goddess who guarded fertility, prosperity, and fate. Her image was carved in ivory or moulded in clay, a triangle for the body, a circle for the face, and raised arms welcoming the heavens. Carthaginian women whispered their hopes to her. The safety of a husband at sea, the survival of a child through fever, or a plentiful harvest from the orchards beyond Bursa Hill. Their faith wasn't meek. It was a daily pact between mortal and divine, sealed with oil and fire. In the narrow streets of Carthage, women's footsteps were as constant as the sound of merchants shouting prices at the docks. Draped in linen dyed with Tyrian purple or ochre, their presence reflected both refinement and resolve. The city respected them, for through them flowed lineage and worship, the lifeblood of Carthaginian identity. Above all, they were daughters of Tanit, mirrors of the goddess herself, symbols of creation and endurance in a city always poised between prosperity and peril. Before the rise of generals and the roar of war elephants, it was these women, unseen by history's loudest chroniclers, who shaped the quiet foundations of Carthage's greatness, guided by the eternal warmth of the Punic sun. While Carthaginian men sailed off to trade tin from Iberia or gold from Africa, it was the women who ruled the home, and not in silence. In their absence, wives became sovereigns of their estates. They oversaw harvests, negotiated with merchants, and managed accounts recorded on wax tablets. A well-born Carthaginian woman was expected to run her household like a miniature kingdom, efficient, profitable, and utterly loyal to the city. Inside the walled courtyards of Punic homes, women directed servants, arranged marriages, and supervised the upbringing of children. Wealthy families lived in limestone villas with painted walls, colonnaded gardens, and flowing water channels brought by ingenious Punic engineers. The mistress of such a house had authority second only to the gods she worshipped. When her husband returned from a voyage, she could present ledgers of grain sales and olive exports as proof of her stewardship, and often her competence outshone his. The idea of the household was sacred, reflecting the divine order embodied by Tanit and Baal-Hamon. Tanit gave fertility, but also wisdom in domestic management. To keep her favour, women performed monthly rites, burning incense, pouring oil, and offering cakes of honey and dates. The act was both economic and spiritual. The household and the temple mirrored one another, both ruled by women who maintained balance between chaos and order. Even among the lower classes, market women and artisans' wives commanded respect. They might not wear purple or gold, but their hands kept Carthage alive, spinning linen, preparing dyes, and bartering at dawn for fresh figs and fish. Their labour sustained the city's heartbeat as much as any soldier or statesman. Foreign visitors, often Greek or Roman, were bewildered by the sight of Carthaginian women conducting business in public or managing temples. To them, it seemed improper, even scandalous. Yet in Carthage, it was simply custom. The Punic worldview saw no contradiction between femininity and authority. Within every home, a woman's domain was not confinement, but command. She was the keeper of wealth, lineage, and divine favour, a quiet queen ruling from behind stone walls. And when she prayed to Tanit for prosperity, she was not asking for blessings. She was claiming them, as was her right beneath the blazing Carthaginian sun. Beyond the walls of their homes, many Carthaginian women held positions that transcended wealth. They served the goddess herself. The priestesses of Tanit were the spiritual heart of the city, guardians of its rituals, keepers of its sacred fire. Draped in white linen and veils dyed faintly blue, they moved through the marble courtyards of the great temple like living embodiments of purity and authority. The cult of Tanit was not a passive one. These women presided over ceremonies that bound the city to its gods, rituals of birth, harvest, and protection. They offered incense and libations before the moon, believing that Tanit's favour ensured the safety of sailors and the fertility of the land. When the crescent appeared over the harbour, it was the priestesses who sang hymns from the temple terraces, voices rising above the city like smoke from sacred oil lamps. Their duties were both mystical and administrative. Priestesses oversaw temple property, managed its lands, and kept detailed records of offerings. They received tributes of gold, grain, and textiles, redistributing them to the poor or to maintain the sacred precincts. They acted as intermediaries between the divine and the civic, often advising magistrates on omens and auspicious days for trade or war. In a society built on contracts and commerce, their spiritual counsel carried real political weight. Initiation into Tanit's service began. Young girls from noble families were chosen for their intellect and composure, trained in hymns, rituals, and sacred lore. Some remained celibate, dedicated entirely to the goddess, while others married high-ranking men but continued to perform priestly duties. Their lives were not cloistered. Rather, they stood at the intersection of faith and power, visible reminders that Carthage's strength flowed from both divine and feminine sources. Outsiders, especially Greek visitors, were fascinated, and often unsettled, by these women who could command temples, interpret signs, and speak publicly in matters of faith. In their writings, they called them witches or sorceresses, unable to comprehend a world where a woman could wield sacred authority. But in Carthage, no one questioned it. The priestesses of Tanit were the voice of the goddess herself, serene, inscrutable, and eternal, guiding the fate of a city that rose and fell beneath her moonlit gaze. Carthaginian religion was not gentle, and neither were its rites. The women of Tanit's cult lived at the crossroads of life and death, guiding rituals that celebrated birth and mourned loss with equal reverence. Every ceremony carried the weight of both joy and fear. Because in Carthage, the gods gave life, but they could just as easily reclaim it. When a woman gave birth, the priestesses of Tanit were invoked first. Offerings of milk, honey, and fragrant oils were placed on the household altar to secure the goddess's protection over the newborn. The mother's survival was never guaranteed. Childbirth was sacred, but perilous. To appease Tanit, families promised gifts to her temple: rings, amulets, or small terracotta figurines shaped like infants. These objects filled the sanctuaries, silent witnesses to the city's dependence on divine mercy. Death, too, was woven into these rituals. When a child perished, the family turned again to Tanit. Some remains were buried in the Tophet, a vast open-air sanctuary where small urns containing ashes and bones were laid beneath stelae, carved with Tanit's symbol: the triangle, the circle, the outstretched arms. Modern historians still argue about what truly occurred there, whether it was symbolic sacrifice or something far darker. But in the minds of ancient Carthaginians, these acts ensured cosmic balance. Women played a crucial role in these moments of transition. They prepared bodies for burial, anointed them with oils, wrapped them in linen, and led the mourning chants. Death was not a private affair. It was a communal acknowledgement of Tanit's power over destiny. The priestesses presided over these ceremonies with calm precision, their chants rhythmic, their gestures ancient. To outsiders, these rites seemed barbaric. Roman writers recoiled at the idea of infants offered to the gods, painting Carthage as monstrous. But to the Carthaginians themselves, such offerings were acts of devotion, not cruelty, the ultimate proof of faith. A mother who placed her child in Tanit's hands believed she was ensuring protection for her family, her city, her people. For Carthaginian women, life and death were not opposites but partners in a divine rhythm. To live under Tanit's gaze was to accept both creation and destruction, and to find grace in the balance between them. Carthage was a city built on trade, and its women were fluent in the language of commerce. While men captained ships that vanished beyond the Pillars of Hercules, women managed what remained: warehouses, accounts, and sometimes even fleets. A merchant's wife was not a passive ornament, she was a business partner. If her husband died abroad, she took his place at the docks, overseeing contracts written in Punic script and sealed with red wax. Gold, silver, ivory, and glass passed through her hands. Carthaginian women invested in vineyards, pottery workshops, and textile production. Linen dyed in Tyrian purple, the symbol of Punic prestige, often came from looms managed entirely by women. In market districts, female traders were a familiar sight, haggling over olive oil prices, appraising ceramics, or trading perfume jars with Phoenician sailors. To the Greeks, it was shocking. To the Carthaginians, it was simply sensible economics. Even in households, financial skill was a virtue. Women kept ledgers on wooden tablets, tracked temple tithes, and ensured offerings were made punctually to Tanit and Baal Hammon, for prosperity required divine maintenance. Failing to honour the gods was considered as reckless as poor bookkeeping. Thus, faith and finance intertwined seamlessly in the Carthaginian worldview. Among the elite, wealthy widows became patrons of temples and sponsors of public works. Their names appeared on stelae, rare in the ancient world, acknowledging their donations to sacred precincts and civic projects. They were respected not only for their wealth, but for their piety and leadership. A woman who managed her fortune well was considered blessed by Tanit. proof that the goddess favoured her prudence. For the lower classes, trade was survival. Fishermen's wives sold salted fish at dawn, artisans' wives wove baskets for caravans, and elderly widows operated street stalls. The hum of female voices in the markets was the heartbeat of Punic Carthage, rhythmic, steady, and unbroken. In a city that worshipped both profit and piety, Carthaginian women mastered the balance. Their silver bracelets jingled like coins, their prayers rose like smoke from incense, and together they maintained the divine economy that made Carthage rich. For them, money was not greed. It was devotion, measured in ledgers and in faith. The beating heart of Carthage was its harbour, twin circles of engineering genius, filled with sails, spice, and shouting sailors. But if you looked closer, you'd see another kind of power at work. Women. Not warriors, but negotiators. Not sailors, but the silent tide that kept the city's economy moving. The wives of merchants were often seen walking along the quays, veiled against the salt wind, yet unmistakably in command. They came to collect ledgers, check manifests, or inspect shipments of ivory, cedar, or gold dust from sub-Saharan Africa. They spoke Punic with dockmasters, Greek with traders, and Egyptian with caravan leaders. Their sharp eyes caught mistakes, and their signatures closed deals. To the astonishment of visiting Greeks, Carthaginian women didn't just accompany trade, they understood it. Some widows of sailors became harbour matriarchs. They operated taverns for merchants and sailors, lending money or food to travellers in exchange for loyalty and information. A few even financed voyages, gambling their fortunes on the winds. A successful expedition could make them rich enough to own warehouses. A failed one could ruin them. But Carthaginian women were not timid gamblers. They had faith, in Tanit, and in their own cunning. Temples overlooked the docks, and offerings to Tanit were made before every major voyage. Women led those prayers, sprinkling wine over the sea as they chanted blessings for safe return. If a ship never came back, it was the women who lit the morning fires and recorded the loss in temple registers. Faith and finance intertwined again. For in Carthage, divine favour was as vital to trade as the wind itself. Foreigners often confused their confidence for arrogance. Greek writers mocked them as merchant wives, claiming they were too bold, too free. But in truth, they were the backbone of Carthaginian prosperity. Each caravan that arrived from the desert, each galley that entered the harbour, owed something to their calculations, their rituals, or their quiet endurance. In the end, it was not the generals or kings who kept Carthage afloat between wars and treaties. It was the matrons of the harbour. Beneath the smell of tar and salt, their presence lingered, commanding, calculating, and unyielding as the sea itself. Beneath Carthage's towering temples, the real power often wore perfume instead of armour. The priestesses and matrons of Tanit's cult were more than spiritual figures. They were political actors cloaked in sanctity. While men debated in the council chambers, women whispered in the temple courtyards, and those whispers could shift alliances, marriages, even wars. The cult of Tanit was woven into every level of Carthaginian life. It owned land, collected tithes, and lent money to the state during crises. At its head stood high priestesses chosen from noble families, women who understood both piety and politics. Their duties were sacred, interpreting omens, organizing rituals, and guarding the temple treasures. Yet their influence reached far beyond the altar. When they blessed a military expedition, they did so with authority that could inspire or unsettle an entire city. Many priestesses came from the same aristocratic lineages that produced generals and magistrates. Through them, the temple became an instrument of diplomacy. When a nobleman's wife served in Tanit's service, her family gained divine prestige. Her presence could sanctify alliances or condemn rivals. Letters between trading colonies often began with blessings in Tanit's name, penned or dictated by these same women. The cult's seal was a mark of legitimacy. Even ordinary citizens sought the priestess's counsel. They were believed to interpret dreams and communicate Tanit's will. In times of plague or drought, Crowds gathered outside the temple to hear their verdicts, whether to appease the goddess with offerings or to prepare for divine wrath. The voice that emerged from behind the incense curtain could change public policy. Carthaginian men might have ruled the Senate, but they never ignored the temple. The state needed Tanit's favour, and Tanit's favour was channeled through her women. That was the unspoken truth of Carthaginian politics. Behind every treaty and festival, behind every prayer for victory, there was a woman ensuring that divine and civic power remained in harmony. To outsiders, these rituals looked like superstition, but to Carthage, they were strategy. The women of Tanit understood something their enemies did not. A city guided by the goddess's voice could not be conquered by sword alone, only by silence, when her priestesses were no more. Carthaginian men went to war for empire, but they were raised by women forged in discipline. The mothers of Carthage were both tender and relentless, for they lived in a city that worshipped strength as much as fertility. Every son was a potential soldier, every daughter a future keeper of Tanit's rights. It was said that Punic mothers did not cry when their sons went to battle. They only prayed that they would return victorious. Childhood in Carthage was an education in endurance. From an early age, boys were taught the virtues of silence, self-control, and devotion to the gods. Their mothers oversaw these lessons as strictly as any tutor. A lazy child could expect not indulgence, but correction. To raise a weak son was a dishonour, both to the family and to Tanit, who valued courage above comfort when war came, and it always did. The women of Carthage prepared their homes like fortresses. They packed supplies, gathered offerings, and made sacrifices for safe return. But when the news of defeat arrived, as it did after the Battle of Himera or the long Roman sieges, they bore it with the same dignity as victory. "Do not weep," an ancient proverb recorded by Roman chroniclers declared. Give thanks that he fought as a Carthaginian. Some women went further still, accompanying armies as attendants and healers, or rallying the population during invasions. When the Romans besieged the city in the final Punic War, it was the women who cut their hair to weave ropes for catapults and melted their jewellery for weaponry. The chronicler Appian wrote that they toiled beside slaves and soldiers alike, their fury a match for flame. The cult of Tanit blessed such defiance. To serve the goddess was to embody resilience, to birth, nurture, and, if needed, to sacrifice for the greater good. Every Carthaginian woman carried a spark of that divine defiance within her. They were the unseen commanders of courage, shaping the spirit of a people who refused to kneel until the city itself turned to ash. And even then, as Rome claimed victory, their legacy whispered on. Mothers who birthed warriors, priestesses who defied empires, and daughters who carried the son of Carthage in their hearts. When Rome's legions finally closed around Carthage, it wasn't generals who faced the last dawn, it was the women. Their husbands were dead or away at sea, their sons too young or too wounded to fight, but the daughters of Tanit did not kneel. As the siege dragged on, they took up the roles once reserved for men, smelting weapons, carrying stones to the ramparts, and standing shoulder to shoulder with slaves and priests in defence of their city. Ancient chroniclers, even hostile ones, could not ignore their courage. Appian described them melting their bracelets and earrings to forge arrowheads. Others told of mothers who refused to flee, choosing instead to guard the temples where Tanit's fire still burned. Inside those sanctuaries, the priestesses prayed, their chants mingling with the distant thunder of Roman siege engines. The scent of incense and blood filled the air, an offering to the goddess of protection in the city's final hour. When the walls were breached, the battle turned to ritual. Women carried statues of Tanit through the burning streets, their robes soaked in ash and tears. They sang hymns not of surrender, but of remembrance, calling upon the goddess to preserve Carthage's spirit beyond ruin. Some set fire to the temples themselves, rather than see them defiled. Flames rose higher than the harbour towers, consuming marble and cedar, but also sanctifying them, transforming destruction into devotion. To the Romans, it was conquest. To the survivors, it was consecration. Even as they were led away in chains, Carthaginian women carried fragments of Tanit's symbol, the triangle, the circle, the outstretched arms, carved on bits of stone or pressed into clay wherever they went. Numidia, Sicily, Iberia, the cult endured. They became the silent missionaries of a fallen city, whispering prayers to Tanit beneath foreign skies. The goddess had promised protection, and in a way, she kept it. Carthage died, but her women ensured she would never be forgotten. Their courage outlasted the flames, their faith outlived empire. Long after the ashes cooled, travellers still found Tanit's symbol carved on desert stones, the eternal mark of women who, in the face of annihilation, chose to burn as offerings rather than bow as slaves. Before her name echoed through Roman nightmares, Boudica was a queen and a mother, ruling a misty corner of Britain under Rome's thin veil of peace. Her people, the Iceni, lived among oak groves and stone circles, proud descendants of warriors who painted their bodies blue with woad and worshipped the spirits of the land. When the Roman Empire swept across Britain, it did not conquer the Iceni by sword, but by treaty. Her husband, King Prasutagus, agreed to rule as a client king, a puppet allowed to wear a crown so long as he bowed to Rome's will. For a time, it worked. Trade flourished, Roman coins gleamed in British hands, and Roman merchants filled Iceni markets with wine and glassware. But beneath the surface, resentment festered. The Romans imposed taxes, built roads for their legions, and sneered at Celtic customs. To them, the Britons were barbarians, wild and backward, unworthy of dignity. Boudica saw the truth. Their alliance was nothing but a leash made of silver. When Prasutagus died around the year 60 CE, he tried to safeguard his people the only way he could, by leaving his kingdom jointly to his daughters and to Emperor Nero. It was a gesture of loyalty, a political insurance policy. But Nero's agents ignored his will entirely. They descended on Iceni lands like vultures. The Roman governor confiscated property, stripped nobles of their rights, and demanded repayment of fictitious debts. Boudica, now widowed, dared to protest. For her defiance, she was publicly flogged. Her daughters, still young, were brutally assaulted by Roman soldiers. The Iceni were enslaved, their fields seized, their sacred groves burned. What was meant as punishment became prophecy. Boudica rose from the dust not as a humiliated widow, but as an avenger. Her pain turned to fire, her shame to strategy. The Romans thought they had crushed a woman. Instead, they had awakened a storm. She gathered her people and called upon the neighbouring tribes, the Trinovantes, the Cornovi, and others long oppressed. In secret councils beneath sacred oaks, she swore vengeance before the gods. The legions of Rome would pay in blood for every lash, every insult, every tear. Britain would burn, and she would lead the fire. Rome's arrogance was its undoing. Across the province of Britannia, resentment simmered like peat fire beneath wet soil, hidden but unstoppable once ignited. The tribes had endured years of humiliation, their land confiscated, their warriors disarmed, their gods mocked by stone-faced invaders who built temples to emperors instead of spirits. All it needed was one spark, and Boudica, scarred but unbroken, struck the flint. The Iceni rose first. Farmers abandoned their ploughs and took up spears. Blacksmiths melted Roman ploughshares into blades. Boudica rode among them, not as a queen robed in luxury, but as a warrior draped in furs and bronze. She raised her spear to the sky and called upon Andraste, the Celtic goddess of war. According to legend, she released a hair from her cloak before the first battle, a sacred omen, and when it ran toward the Romans' doom, her warriors roared in frenzy. Word spread swiftly. The neighbouring Trinovantes, long brutalised by the Roman colony at Camulodunum, modern Colchester, joined her. So did the men and women of distant tribes who had suffered under Roman taxation and forced labour. The rebellion swelled like a tide. In every village, drums sounded and fires blazed on hilltops, signals of defiance carried by smoke across the horizon. Meanwhile, Rome was unprepared. The governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, was far away campaigning in North Wales, crushing the Druids on the island of Mona. With the legions occupied, only a handful of officials remained to guard the Roman settlements in the east. They laughed off the reports of Celtic unrest. After all, what threat could a grieving woman pose to the most disciplined army on earth? Then came the first strike. Boudica led her army, some estimate over 100,000 strong, straight to Camulodunum, the symbol of Roman oppression. The town's colonists were veterans who had stolen tribal lands and built a temple to the deified Emperor Claudius, demanding the locals pay for its upkeep. To the Britons, it was not a temple. It was an insult carved in stone. When Boudica's warriors descended upon it, the Romans had no walls, no reinforcements, and no mercy waiting for them. The rebellion had begun, and Britannia would never be the same again. The Roman colony of Camulodunum was the perfect target, bloated with arrogance and undefended. Built on stolen Iceni and Trinovantian land, it was meant to showcase Rome's civilization to the barbarians. Paved streets, marble statues, and a grand temple dedicated to Emperor Claudius. To the Britons it was a fortress of their humiliation. To Boudica it was the first name on her vengeance list. As dawn broke, the ground trembled with the march of thousands. Boudica's army advanced through the fog, a living forest of spears and painted faces. The Roman veterans inside laughed at first. They had walls, they thought. They had discipline. What they didn't have was an army. For time, most of the garrison had been withdrawn to Wales, leaving behind aging soldiers and terrified colonists. Their cries for reinforcements went unanswered. When the Britons struck, they struck like thunder. The Temple of Claudius became the Romans' last refuge, its marble columns blackened by fire. For 2 days, the defenders held out, praying for the legions to appear on the horizon. None came. Boudica's warriors tore down the gates and stormed the sanctuary, slaughtering every survivor. Statues of emperors were toppled, their faces smashed, their bronze melted down to forge new weapons. The city's streets ran red. Camulodunum burned for days. The air filled with smoke and the scent of scorched cedar from Roman villas. The Britons razed everything. The forums, the baths, even the markets. To them, this was not mere revenge. It was purification. The land was being cleansed of Rome's arrogance, its foreign gods, its false order. When the flames finally died, nothing of Rome remained but ash and ruin. Messengers fled to Londinium, warning of the destruction, but their words carried more than panic. They carried a legend. The story of a woman who had defied Rome and won. Even Emperor Nero's officials trembled when they heard her name. The procurator Catus Decianus fled the province in disgrace, leaving the survivors to fend for themselves. For the first time, Rome's iron image cracked. A Celtic queen had turned an entire Roman city to dust, and her army, still chanting her name, was already marching toward the next Londinium would be next to burn. News of Camulodunum's fall spread faster than any Roman courier could ride. Smoke blackened the eastern sky and panic swept through the province. The young city of Londinium, a bustling trading hub on the Thames, braced for what everyone now feared. Merchants packed their wares, Roman officials fled, and the civilians who stayed prayed that the legions would arrive before the red-haired queen did. They didn't. When Governor Suetonius Paulinus finally heard of the uprising, he raced back from Wales with a single legion, far too few to face Boudica's swelling host. He reached Londinium first, and surveyed its wooden streets and merchant stalls. He knew what was coming. To his officers, he gave a brutal order: abandon the city. It could not be defended. Those who stayed would die. They did. Boudica's army descended upon Londinium like a storm from the north. Her warriors poured across the riverbanks, torches in hand, eyes painted black. The city was young, rich, and utterly unfortified, a symbol of Roman greed sprouting from stolen soil. Boudica offered no quarter. Roman settlers, traders, slaves, all were swept away in the fury of her vengeance. The streets became rivers of flame. Archaeologists centuries later would find the scar of that day, a layer of red ash beneath London's modern streets, still known as the Boudican Destruction Horizon. Beneath it lay shattered pottery, charred beams, and the twisted remains of those who couldn't escape. To her warriors, the burning of Londinium was justice to Rome, it was terror. Reports reached Nero that an entire province might be lost. The empire that had crushed Gaul, Greece and Egypt now trembled before a Celtic queen. Yet in victory, Boudica's rebellion grew heavier. Her following swelled to nearly 200,000. Tribesmen, farmers, even slaves freed from Roman chains. But with numbers came chaos. Discipline faltered, supplies dwindled, and the brutal vengeance that had begun as liberation began to consume itself. Still, Boudica pressed on. Her fury was not spent, and another Roman town awaited, Verulamium, the prosperous settlement that had once called her people savages. The fires of rebellion were not yet done with Britain. The Queen of the Iceni was still riding, and behind her, the island itself seemed to rise. After Londinium's ashes cooled, the rebellion's fury turned north toward Verulamium, modern-day St. Albans, a Romanized town built on the ruins of old tribal lands to Rome. It was a symbol of progress and civilization. To Boudica, it was another wound carved into Britain's flesh. Her warriors, swollen now to hundreds of thousands, advanced across the countryside like an unending tide. Villages that had once bowed to Rome now raised her banner. Verulamium's citizens had heard the rumours. They had seen the smoke on the horizon and the refugees who stumbled into their streets with stories of slaughter. Still, many believed the walls would hold, that Roman authority, even in absence, would protect them. It did not. When the Britons arrived, there were no legions, no reinforcements, and no mercy. Boudica's army descended upon the town at dawn. Roman villas, once symbols of comfort, became pyres. Her soldiers showed no distinction between colonist and collaborator. Every Roman ally was an enemy. The fury that drove them was not blind chaos. It was generational rage. For decades, their families had been enslaved, their lands confiscated, their gods desecrated. Now, with their queen at the front, vengeance took form in fire. Flames engulfed the city. The sound of timber collapsing under heat mingled with the battle cries of warriors. Roman chronicles later called it a massacre. But to the Britons, it was justice repaid in equal measure. The smoke rose high enough to be seen for miles, a signal to all tribes still hesitating. Rome could bleed. When word of Verulamium's fall reached Suetonius Paulinus, he finally grasped the scale of the catastrophe. 3 major settlements, Camalodunum, Londinium, and now Verulamium, had been erased. The death toll numbered in the tens of thousands. Nero's advisors whispered of abandoning Britain entirely. The empire, for all its power, had been brought to the brink by a single woman. But victory came at a cost. Boudica's vast army was now burdened by plunder, its ranks undisciplined and its supplies strained. The rebellion's unity began to waver. Suetonius, hardened and calculating, saw his chance. He would not strike a burning city. He would strike the fire-starter herself. The final reckoning was near, and both queen and empire prepared for the storm to break. Boudica's army no longer moved like a tribe. It moved like a nation reborn in fury. Columns of warriors stretched for miles across the English countryside, drums echoing through the valleys. The queen rode in a chariot drawn by 2 horses, her daughters beside her, the scars of their suffering visible reminders of why they fought. Her hair streamed like fire in the wind, her spear glittering like lightning under the grey British sky. To her followers, she was not merely human, she was Andraste's living incarnation. Yet with every victory, her host grew harder to control. Tribes that once fought side by side now quarrelled over loot. Boudica tried to command unity, but her warriors were farmers and hunters, not soldiers. They had no training, no supply lines, and little patience for Roman tactics. The countryside they marched through was stripped bare. Roman villas and temples lay in ashes, but the destruction left them with nothing to eat but what they could scavenge. Still, the queen pressed forward. Her momentum was her greatest weapon, and she knew Rome would soon strike back. Governor Suetonius Paulinus had regrouped. From the ashes of defeat, he gathered what remained of the legions, veterans of the campaigns in Wales, disciplined and furious. They numbered only 10,000, but they were soldiers forged by Empire. Suetonius moved swiftly, marching through the ruins of the rebellion, determined to corner Boudica before her army could disperse. As she advanced westward, scouts brought word. The Roman legions had been sighted, forming ranks near a narrow defile somewhere along Watling Street. Boudica halted her army and called a war council. Her chieftains urged attack. They believed the gods were still with them. "This is the moment," she said, "when we prove whether we are slaves or free." The next morning, her army assembled before dawn. Men, women, and even children who had followed their families into rebellion. Behind them, wagons formed a great circle, filled with plunder, prisoners, and families who had come to watch Rome fall. But Suetonius had chosen his ground well, a narrow valley flanked by forest, with only one way in and none out. The queen's fury had brought her this far. The battle that awaited her would decide if her name would echo in victory or in vengeance. When dawn broke over the hills near Watling Street, the air was thick with mist, and with destiny. Before her, Boudica saw the narrow valley where the Romans had chosen to make their stand. To her, it looked like a trap. To Suetonius Paulinus, it was salvation. His legions were outnumbered 20-1, yet his discipline was iron, his position perfect. Forests shielded his flanks, and a single road funneled the rebels into the jaws of the empire. Boudica rode before her troops in a chariot, her daughters standing beside her. Ancient writers claimed she spoke with a voice like thunder. "We fight not for gold or conquest, but for freedom, for our children, our gods, and the land that bore us. Let the men of Rome learn that a woman can lead an army, and that tyranny has an end." Her warriors roared in answer. Behind them, their families and wagons formed a massive ring, cutting off any hope of retreat. When the Britons charged, it was as if the entire island had risen. Their cries shook the trees, their chariots thundered forward, but Rome waited. The legions stood shoulder to shoulder, shields locked, their discipline cold as iron. At the last moment, the Romans hurled their pila, heavy javelins that tore through shields and flesh. The first ranks of Britons collapsed, tripping those behind. Still, they came on, crashing against the Roman wall like waves against a cliff. Then Suetonius gave the order, "Advance." The legions surged forward in tight formation, stabbing with short gladii, every motion drilled by years of war. The Britons, trapped by their own wagons, had nowhere to fall back. Panic spread. What had begun as a tidal wave of vengeance turned into chaos. By sunset, the valley was silent except for the groans of the dying. Tens of thousands of Britons lay dead. The Romans lost only a few hundred. The rebellion that had nearly shattered an empire ended in blood and smoke. No one knows what became of Boudica. Some say she poisoned herself rather than be taken captive. Others claim she vanished into the forests, her spirit forever haunting the mists of Britain, the queen who dared to defy Rome and became legend. The battlefield at Watling Street was a graveyard of broken spears and silence. The smell of iron and smoke hung over the valley, where dreams of freedom had died. The Romans, methodical even in victory, buried their dead and burned the rest. To them, it was a triumph, order restored, rebellion crushed. To the Britons, it was a wound that would never heal. Boudica herself was nowhere to be found. Some said she poisoned herself, refusing to be paraded through Rome in chains like a trophy. Others whispered she fled into the forests, vanishing into legend. Her daughters, too, disappeared from the record, their fates left to the mists. The Romans didn't bother to record her burial. For them, the rebellion was over, but for her people, the queen became a ghost that never stopped riding. Governor Suetonius Paulinus, ruthless in his victory, continued to punish the tribes. His soldiers ravaged the countryside, slaughtering anyone suspected of aiding the revolt. Entire villages were burned, and the survivors enslaved. The same fields that had once grown barley and oats for Boudicca's army now grew wild and untended, haunted by memory. Even Emperor Nero, hearing of the devastation, considered withdrawing from Britain altogether. The cost of empire, he realized, was higher than gold could measure. Yet in defeat, Boudicca achieved what no warrior before her had. She forced Rome to hesitate. For the first time, the empire questioned whether its reach had grown too far. In the years that followed, Roman governors ruled Britain with newfound caution. They rebuilt roads and cities, yes, but they also built statues of local deities, honouring Celtic gods they had once mocked. Fear had taught them respect. Among the tribes, songs replaced swords. Bards sang of the flame-haired queen who rose from humiliation to challenge the world's greatest power. Her story spread from campfires to chronicles, growing with every telling. She was no longer just a woman or a warrior. She was an idea. Even Rome, centuries later, could not erase her name. The empire she defied has long turned to dust, but the legend of Boudicca, the queen who dared to fight Rome, still burns, fierce and unbowed, in the heart of history. The flames of Boudicca's rebellion eventually died, but her legend refused to. Rome may have won the battle, but they could not erase the memory of the woman who had shaken their empire to its core. In the years following the uprising, the Romans rebuilt their towns, paving new roads over the bones of the fallen. Yet every soldier stationed in Britain remembered her name, the queen who made even Emperor Nero tremble. For the tribes, Boudicca became more than a queen. She became a symbol of freedom, vengeance, and unyielding defiance. Around fires on misty nights, storytellers spoke of her hair like flame and her eyes like storm clouds, of the day she rose against the conquerors and nearly broke their iron rule. To her people, she had not died, she had ascended, a warrior spirit forever watching over the green hills of Britain. Roman chroniclers, though enemies, could not help but immortalize her. Tacitus wrote of her courage and eloquence. Cassius Dio painted her as both terrifying and majestic. Even in their words, meant to warn others, she emerged as something more than mortal. A living contradiction, brutal and noble, fierce and just. The conquerors had made her a martyr, and martyrs never fade. Centuries later, as Rome's power decayed, Boudicca's story endured in whispers and manuscripts, resurfacing whenever tyranny returned to Britain during the Renaissance. She re-emerged in art and poetry, not as a relic of barbarism, but as the first mother of British freedom. When the Victorians rediscovered her, she was reborn as an icon of empire. The irony lost on those who once ruled as Rome had. Today, a bronze statue of Boudicca stands by the Thames, her chariot drawn by rearing horses, spear lifted high. Tourists walk past it, unaware that beneath their feet lies the very ash layer, the Boudiccan destruction horizon, marking where she burned London to the ground. Her rebellion failed, but her message did not. She proved that even the mightiest empire could be shaken by the will of one woman. Her victory was not measured in cities conquered, but in courage remembered. And so Boudicca rides on, through history, through myth, and through every soul that refuses to bow to oppression. Before the borders of kingdoms and empires, the highlands of Dardania stood as a world unto themselves, a landscape of stone ridges, deep valleys, and silver rivers cutting through what is now Kosovo and northern Albania. Here, the Illyrian tribes lived close to the earth and sky, their lives shaped by the rhythm of the mountains. Winters were long and fierce, but spring brought a transformation. The thawing of rivers, the blooming of mountain flowers, and with it, the call to gather. The Dardanians were not a single tribe, but a brotherhood of many clans. shepherds, hunters, and warriors, bound by shared ancestry and language. Though each tribe had its own chieftain and customs, once a year they became one people. From all directions, families and warriors journeyed to the great gathering fields, high plateaus surrounded by forests and sacred stones. For them, this was more than a celebration. It was a renewal of unity, an offering to the gods who guarded fertility, war, and the harvest. As the festival approached, the valleys came alive. Herds of cattle and goats were driven toward the meeting ground. Women carried baskets filled with barley, cheese, and honey, while men hoisted amphorae of fermented drink. Smoke from distant hearths began to merge into a single column over the horizon, the sign that Dardania was awakening. At the heart of it all stood the altar of the gods. Offerings were made to Depatur, the Illyrian sky father, and to Prende, the goddess of love and fertility. Priestesses lit the first flames of the sacred fire, a signal that the festival had begun. Around them, warriors painted their faces with ochre and ash, preparing for contests of strength, while elders recited ancient verses passed down through generations. For a few days, the rivalries of the tribes vanished. Spears were set aside, trade was conducted freely, and laughter echoed through the hills. Music filled the air, drums, flutes, and stringed lyres made from goat sinew, each note a reminder that the Dardanians celebrated not only survival, but the joy of being alive. In this mountain cradle, surrounded by gods and kin, the spirit of Dardania burned bright, fierce, and eternal. As the first warmth of spring swept across the valleys, messengers rode through the highlands to announce the festival's coming. Horns sounded from hilltops, echoing from one settlement to the next, carrying the same message. The time of gathering had come. The Dardanian tribes, scattered across the rugged terrain of what is now Kosovo and northern Albania, began their great migration toward the sacred meeting grounds. Families packed their wagons with barley bread, smoked meat, and amphorae of wine. Warriors polished their bronze weapons until they gleamed in the sunlight, not for war, but for pride. From every valley, clan banners fluttered in the wind, woven with symbols of wolves, eagles, and serpents, each representing an ancient bloodline. It was a sight that turned the mountain passes into rivers of colour and song. The tribes converged at the great plateau near the sacred hill of Ulpiana, where the earth was said to breathe with divine power. There, elders built stone circles and lit torches that burned day and night. The sound of drums began long before the first feast, deep, rhythmic, and primal, a heartbeat that called every Dardanian home. The gathering was not merely celebration, it was diplomacy. Chieftains from rival clans met face to face, exchanged gifts of silver and horses, and renewed their oaths of kinship. Marriages were arranged to unite families, and disputes that had simmered through winter were settled beneath the watchful eyes of the gods. At night, the fires multiplied. The mountains glowed red under the stars as bards sang of Dardanian heroes, warriors who had defied Macedonian kings and fought for Illyrian honour. The music was unending, wooden flutes, goat-skin drums, and the strumming of lyres carved from bone. Dancers moved in circles, their feet striking the earth like rain, while young men competed in strength and agility to win the admiration of priestesses and maidens. For those few sacred days, Dardania was not divided by clan or valley. It was one people, bound by tradition, fire, and song. In those gatherings, the tribes remembered who they were, not subjects of foreign kings, but children of the mountains, keepers of the old gods, and heirs to an unbroken legacy of unity. At the heart of the Dardanian festival burned the sacred flame, the living spirit of the land, believed to carry the breath of the gods. Before the games, before the feasts, the first duty of the tribes was to awaken that flame. It was no simple fire. It symbolized the bond between heaven and earth, tribe and ancestor, god and mortal. At dawn, Priestesses in white linen robes walked barefoot through the dew-covered grass, carrying torches from their village hearths. Each flame came from a different valley, some from the Drin, others from the plains of Kosovo-Polje or the shores of Lake Ohrid. They met at the central altar, a stone platform ringed with carved spirals and sun symbols. There, the flames were merged into one, the fire of Dardania. The lighting of the flame was the most solemn moment of the entire gathering. Silence fell over the thousands who watched. As the torches touched, smoke rose in spiraling columns, drifting toward the sky like prayers. The high priestess, usually an elder woman from a royal bloodline, raised her hands and called upon the gods. Depatur, lord of the sky, and Prende, goddess of fertility and love. She spoke words older than memory, blessings for the herds, the fields, and the warriors who would soon test their strength. Once the sacred fire blazed high, the silence broke. Horns sounded from the hills, and the people erupted into song. Each tribe took turns offering gifts: milk, honey, barley, and wine. Animals were led forward for sacrifice: sheep, goats, or doves, chosen for purity. Their blood consecrated the ground, binding the tribes in shared faith. Throughout the festival, this flame was never allowed to die. Young women took turns keeping watch through the night, feeding it with resin and oak branches. To let it fade was to insult the gods, a curse that would bring famine and disease. When the gathering ended, the fire was divided again. Each clan carried a portion home in clay lamps, ensuring that every village in Dardania shared the same divine light. The sacred flame was more than ritual. It was identity. It reminded every Dardanian that no matter how distant their valleys, they all burned from the same eternal source. Once the sacred flame was lit, the time of feasting began, a celebration as ancient as the mountains themselves. Food was not merely sustenance here, it was a sacred act, a symbol of abundance and gratitude to the gods. Every clan contributed from their stores: smoked lamb wrapped in aromatic herbs, flatbreads baked on stone, honey cakes, and amphorae of dark Illyrian wine that shimmered crimson in the firelight. At the centre of the great camp stood long wooden tables carved with tribal symbols. The elders were seated first, followed by chieftains, warriors, and finally, the youth. It was a social order reflected in every bowl passed and every toast raised. Before the first bite, the high priestess poured wine upon the ground as an offering to the ancestors, a silent tribute to those who had feasted before them and watched from the stars above. Music guided the meal. Flutes and drums played steady rhythms, while bards recited the songs of the hills, poems praising the unity of Dardania and the valour of its people. Between verses, laughter rolled through the crowd as stories of hunts, raids, and great loves filled the air. Even rival chieftains shared cups, their old grievances washed away by the warmth of mead and the promise of peace, at least until the festival ended. As night deepened, the bonfires multiplied. Shadows danced on stone circles as dancers moved in great spirals, men and women weaving together, stamping their feet in rhythm with the drums. Every movement was both art and ritual, a reenactment of the harmony between earth and sky. Above them, the constellations were named aloud, each star tied to a legend of the Illyrian gods. Children watched wide-eyed as jugglers and storytellers performed by torchlight. Nearby, hunters roasted game over open flames, while women ground barley for the next day's feasts. The scent of smoke, meat, and pine filled the night air. The feast of the tribes was more than indulgence. It was renewal. Each shared meal reaffirmed the kinship that held Dardania together, even through war and hardship. For one sacred night, every Dardanian, chieftain, shepherd, and smith alike, dined as family beneath the eternal fire and the forgiving eyes of their gods. When the feasting ended, the fires burned lower and the songs turned to chants. It was time for the games. The Dardanian festivals were not complete without the contests that tested the body, spirit, and pride of the tribes. These were no idle spectacles. They were sacred rituals meant to honour the gods of strength, fertility, and war. At dawn, the chieftains gathered their warriors in the open fields below the sacred hill. The drums began again, slow, steady beats that grew faster as the crowd gathered. The air buzzed with energy. Banners waved in the wind as the high priest raised a torch and declared the games open in the name of Eng, the Illyrian god of thunder and valour. The first competitions were of pure strength. Men wrestled on the grass, oiled in animal fat to make their grips slippery, their muscles glistening in the sun. The victor was not the one who struck hardest, but the one who remained on his feet longest, a symbol of endurance, a trait every warrior prized. Then came the spear throw, where hunters hurled their weapons at wooden targets painted with wolf heads. The farthest and truest throw won not only prizes of meat or silver, but the admiration of the women who watched from the terraces. Next came the chariot races. Young men drove horses around marked tracks, the wheels kicking up dust that shimmered in the sunlight. The cheering was thunderous, for the Dardanians believed the gods rode alongside their horses, guiding the swiftest to victory. Those who fell or crashed were carried from the field with reverence. They were said to have been touched by Eng. Women, too, took part in their own rites of skill and grace. Weaving contests displayed artistry, while dance competitions honoured Prende, goddess of love and renewal. Each victory, whether in strength or beauty, was celebrated as a divine gift by sunset. Garlands of oak and laurel crowned the winners. They stood before the sacred flame, lifting their prizes high as the crowd chanted their names. For the Dardanians, these games were more than sport. They were proof that courage, skill, and unity could outlast even the mountains that sheltered them. When the games ended and the dust of the arena settled, another kind of contest began. One not of muscle or might, but of spirit. Music was the soul of Dardania, and no festival could pass without the sound of drums, flutes, and voices rising into the mountain air. As night fell, the warriors laid down their spears, and the bards stepped forward, carrying the stories of their people in melody and verse. The music began with rhythm. The deep, steady pulse of frame drums made from goat hide stretched over oak rings. Their beat echoed through the valleys like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Then came the flutes, carved from bone or elder wood, filling the air with wild, spiralling notes that seemed to mimic the call of the wind over the ridges. Women joined with tambourines, their bracelets jingling in time, while singers gathered in circles, voices weaving together in haunting harmonies that could stir both tears and laughter. The songs told of heroes long gone, warriors who had defied Macedonian kings, hunters who tamed wolves, lovers who crossed rivers of fire to reach each other. Every lyric carried history. These were not written stories. They were living ones, sung to keep memory alive. Each clan had its own verses, but when the bards met, they sang together as one, creating a tapestry of Dardanian pride that no empire could erase. As the tempo quickened, dancers took the stage. They moved in circles around the sacred flame, feet stamping in complex rhythms, shoulders swaying, arms raised to the stars. The dance was not random. It mirrored the cycles of nature, the turning of seasons, the eternal bond between gods and men. Young men and women often met for the first time in these dances, their movements a language of courtship older than words. By midnight, the entire gathering had become one living song. The fires burned high, sparks spiralling into the black sky like prayers. The echoes of drums rolled through the valleys, reaching even the shepherds on distant peaks. In those moments, the Dardanians felt immortal. Their voices joined in a harmony that no storm, no war, no passing empire could silence. When the last echoes of the drums faded, the dancers stepped into the firelight. Their movements were not simple entertainment. They were prayer, story, and prophecy. The dances of the gods were the most sacred part of the Dardanian festival, said to bridge the world of mortals and the divine. Every gesture, every turn of the hand or step of the foot mirrored an ancient myth passed down since the dawn of their people. The dance began with the circle of creation, performed by women dressed in white linen embroidered with red spirals, symbols of life and rebirth. Moving slowly around the sacred flame, they traced the path of the sun and moon, invoking Prende, goddess of love and renewal. Their arms rose and fell like the rhythm of the seasons, and the crowd joined in, chanting softly in the old tongue. The circle represented harmony, the unbroken bond between tribe, nature, and God. Then came the dance of the Thunderer, led by warriors in wolfskins. They stamped their feet in powerful rhythmic bursts, mimicking storms rolling over the mountains. Spears clashed, torches whirled, and sparks flew skyward as the men called upon Eng, the god of war and lightning. To outsiders, it looked like battle, but to the Dardanians, it was devotion, a promise to defend their land as fiercely as the gods defended the heavens. As the tempo quickened, men and women danced together, pairs weaving in intricate patterns, symbolizing balance between strength and beauty, passion and peace. Children tossed flower petals into the air, the scent of mountain herbs mixing with the smoke of the sacred fires. By midnight, the entire gathering became one vast circle, thousands moving as one under the stars. It was said that during this dance, the ancestors themselves joined in, invisible feet echoing in the earth. The fires reflected in every eye, and for a moment, the living and the dead, the human and the divine, were bound in the same eternal rhythm. When the dance ended, silence fell. The only sound was the crackling of the sacred flame, the heartbeat of Dardania, still burning strong beneath the endless mountain sky. With dawn's first light, the music softened and the festival turned toward the most sacred of its rituals, the rites of fertility and renewal. These were not simple celebrations of harvest or birth. They were ancient vows to ensure the balance between earth, gods, and people remained unbroken. The Dardanians believed that every seed, every newborn lamb, every drop of rain was tied to their faithfulness in these rites. At sunrise, the priestesses of Prende, goddess of love and fertility, emerged from the temple tents beside the sacred flame. They wore wreaths of wildflowers and carried bowls of milk and honey, offerings to awaken the life hidden in the soil. Men and women gathered in silence as the priestesses poured these gifts upon the ground, chanting words so old that even the elders only half understood them. The earth, they said, listened best when spoken to in the language of the gods. After the offerings, young couples came forward, betrothed or newlywed, to receive blessings for fruitful unions. The priestesses tied red threads around their wrists, a symbol of protection and enduring life. As the drums resumed, the couples danced barefoot in the grass, circling the sacred fire while the crowd clapped and sang. Their movements were mirrored by the fields themselves, the dance of love and growth, mirrored by the eternal dance of the seasons. Children, too, played their part. They carried baskets of grain and scattered seeds into the wind, an act both playful and divine. The people believed these seeds would find their way into fertile soil, ensuring a rich harvest. Even the warriors took part, washing their hands in spring water to cleanse themselves of blood and prepare for peace. At midday, the priestesses raised their hands to the sky and called upon Depatur, the sky father, to bless the land with rain. When a breeze stirred or clouds began to gather, the people cheered, proof, they believed, that the gods had accepted their gifts. The rites of fertility were not about indulgence, but harmony, a recognition that every heartbeat, every stalk of wheat, every child born beneath those mountains was part of one endless circle. For the Dardanians, to honour life was to honour the divine. As the final night of the festival approached, the fires that had burned for days began to dwindle. The air was heavy with the scent of pine smoke, roasted meat, and the faint sweetness of spilled wine. It was time for the farewell to the flame, the closing rite that marked the end of celebration, and the return to daily life. Yet it was not a moment of sorrow. For the Dardanians, This ending was also a renewal, a promise that the god's fire would live on within every home, every hearth, every heart. Before dawn, the high priestess approached the sacred fire that had been kept alive since the first day. Around her stood the tribal elders, their cloaks lined with wolf fur and bronze clasps gleaming in the light. The priestess raised her staff carved with spirals, symbols of eternity, and spoke to the crowd. She thanked Depatur for his strength, Prenda for her blessings, and Eng for the courage that bound the tribes together. Then she declared that the flame must now return to the people. One by one, each tribe stepped forward carrying clay lamps and torches. From the great fire, the priestess lit them, speaking blessings for protection, fertility, and peace. The tribes bowed as they received the flame, holding it high while chanting in unison, a chorus that rolled across the valleys like thunder. The light of 1,000 small fires spread across the hillsides, shimmering like stars fallen to earth. As the sun began to rise, the great fire at the center was finally allowed to die. The priestesses covered it with earth and flowers, sealing its ashes beneath stones engraved with ancient runes. The people wept, but not in grief. They wept because the moment was sacred. What had united them under one sky would now live within each household across Dardania. Before departing, the bards sang one final song, a slow, haunting melody about life's eternal cycle. Children laughed, oxen were yoked, and the tribes began their journeys home, carrying both the god's flame and the memory of their unity. As the last smoke faded into the mountain air, the land of Dardania returned to silence. Yet beneath that silence, the sacred fire still burned, unseen but eternal.